Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night, consumed by a question so simple yet so profound? What is the meaning of life? It's a question that has plagued humanity for centuries, echoing in the minds of philosophers, poets, and thinkers alike. But what if I told you that one of the greatest writers in history, Leo Tolstoy, faced this question not during a time of struggle or adversity, but at the peak of his fame, wealth, and success? How could a man who had everything: literary fame, a loving family, and material wealth feel trapped in a void, desperate to understand why he was alive? Tolstoy's journey was a paradox, one that began in despair and led to an extraordinary spiritual awakening. He wasn't just asking the typical questions of existence. He was staring into the abyss of nihilism, wondering whether any of it, his life, his work, or even his accomplishments really mattered. At 50, after achieving what many would consider a perfect life, Tolstoy found himself on the edge, contemplating death as a way out of his existential crisis. What happened next is nothing short of remarkable. Join me as we explore the incredible journey of a man who moved from profound disillusionment and nihilism to a transformative, faith-driven understanding of life. This is the story of Leo Tolstoy, the philosopher who solved the meaning of life. Leo Tolstoy's early years were marked by an overwhelming sense of loss and disillusionment that set the stage for his lifelong struggle with the meaning of existence. Orphaned at the tender age of 9, he was thrust into a world where the security of family and the comfort of parental guidance were suddenly absent. The harshness of this reality would shape much of his worldview, leaving him with feelings of abandonment and a deep-seated distrust of the very institutions that were supposed to provide him with answers: religion, family, society. The death of his parents, especially his mother when he was just a child, marked the beginning of an internal battle with existential questions that would continue to haunt him throughout his life. Growing up in a privileged environment, Tolstoy had all the material comforts that anyone could desire. He was part of Russia's aristocracy, a landowner with wealth and status, and later in life, he became one of the most renowned writers of his time. Yet, despite these outward signs of success, Tolstoy felt deeply unfulfilled. He questioned the value of wealth, fame, and the comforts of a family life that so many others would envy. To him, the questions that really mattered were not those about outward achievements, but rather about the nature of existence itself. Why are we here? What is the meaning of it all? In his younger years, he turned to religion for answers, only to be left disappointed. As he grew older and became more disillusioned, Tolstoy's faith in religion began to erode. The traditional Christian teachings that had been instilled in him as a child seemed hollow and insufficient to explain the complex and painful reality of life. He began to feel that religion, rather than offering a path to understanding, was merely a set of comforting fictions designed to placate the masses. In his youth, Tolstoy felt that religious dogma was too far removed from the raw, painful realities of human existence. The idea of a loving God who allowed suffering and death seemed contradictory to him, especially as he observed the inequalities and injustices in the world around him. How could there be a higher power who allowed such cruelty and despair? If life was so full of suffering, what was the point of it all? As Tolstoy entered adulthood, he continued to experience the growing conflict between his desire for answers and the emptiness of the intellectual frameworks he encountered. He was not alone in his questioning. The late 19th century, during which Tolstoy lived, was a time of profound intellectual upheaval. Many thinkers were grappling with similar doubts about the existence of God and the nature of human life. The rise of scientific rationalism, alongside the influence of philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, who declared the death of God, only deepened Tolstoy's sense of spiritual isolation. The more he searched for answers in religion, philosophy, and literature, the more he felt lost. Tolstoy's personal struggle mirrored the larger intellectual climate of his time. For many, the traditional sources of meaning, religion, reason, or the idea of progress were becoming increasingly inadequate. The world, with all its complexity and chaos, seemed indifferent to human suffering. The famous philosopher Albert Camus would later describe this feeling as the absurd. the recognition that life's meaning cannot be rationally explained or found through any traditional systems of thought. But while many thinkers like Camus embraced the absurd and found freedom in accepting life's meaninglessness, Tolstoy couldn't accept this notion. For him, the idea that life could be reduced to an accident, a series of random events leading to death, was unbearable. This existential crisis, this deep questioning of the very nature of existence, reached its zenith when Tolstoy turned 50. By this point, he had accomplished everything that most people would consider the pinnacle of success. He had written world-famous novels like War and Peace and Anna Karenina. He had a family, and he was financially secure. Yet, despite all of this, Tolstoy was overcome by a deep sense of futility. The achievements that had once seemed so meaningful now appeared trivial. Fame and wealth could not answer the questions that tormented him. What is the purpose of life? Why is there suffering? What happens after death? It's easy to understand why Tolstoy felt trapped in this intellectual prison. Imagine being one of the most famous people in the world, surrounded by the adulation of others, and still feeling as though something fundamental was missing. It's a situation that many of us might find hard to relate to on a personal level. But there are modern-day figures who have faced similar struggles. Take, for instance, Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple. Jobs, like Tolstoy, achieved remarkable success and was revered by millions. Yet, despite his wealth and influence, he found himself facing profound existential questions. In his biography, Jobs admitted that he had spent years grappling with the meaning of life, particularly in the face of his battle with cancer. Despite his innovations and accomplishments, he struggled with the same questions that Tolstoy did. Why are we here? What is the point of all of this? For Tolstoy, the crisis of meaning was exacerbated by the realization that all of his intellectual pursuits had led him to more questions, rather than answers. Every time he thought he had found a solution, he would encounter a new layer of doubt. This intellectual prison became an increasingly suffocating space, as Tolstoy realized that reason alone could not provide him with the peace he so desperately sought. No matter how much he read, no matter how many different philosophies he explored, he found that none of them gave him the answers he needed. The world seemed full of suffering, and no philosophical or religious framework could adequately explain why life had to be this way. Tolstoy reached a point where he questioned whether anything in life truly mattered. If death awaited us all in the end, what could possibly be the point of all our struggles? All our striving? Why live? If life has no inherent meaning? Tolstoy's sense of despair culminated in a crisis that almost led him to take his own life. In his confessional essay, A Confession, he revealed just how deeply he had sunk into nihilism. At one point, he considered suicide as the only way to escape the unbearable weight of existential doubt. He felt that the intellectual pursuits that had defined his life had only led him in circles, offering no escape from the darkness that now seemed to envelop him. It was a terrifying realization that many of us, at some point, have faced. The fear that no matter how much we achieve, no matter how much we accumulate, it will all come to an end, and in the grand scheme of things, none of it will matter. Yet, in the midst of this despair, Tolstoy began to see a glimmer of hope. It was not through intellectual reasoning, nor through scientific discovery, that he found peace. Instead, it was through a deep, personal exploration of faith that he found a way out of the existential trap he had created for himself. It wasn't that Tolstoy suddenly found answers that fit neatly into his intellectual framework. Rather, he experienced a shift in perspective, a kind of spiritual awakening that allowed him to embrace the idea that meaning could not always be found through reason alone. In this, Tolstoy's journey from despair to faith reflects a broader human struggle, one that transcends time and place. Whether we are powerful figures like Tolstoy or ordinary individuals, we all face moments when we question the meaning of our lives. Even today, many of the world's most influential figures struggle with similar questions. Elon Musk, for example, has publicly discussed his own existential doubts and his desire to find purpose in his work. Despite his vast wealth and revolutionary achievements in the tech industry, Musk has admitted that he often wonders about the larger meaning of life. and whether there is more to existence than simply advancing technology. Tolstoy's story, therefore, is not just the tale of a great writer and thinker. It is a universal story about the human condition. It is about the struggle to find meaning in a world that often seems indifferent to our suffering. For Tolstoy, this struggle led him to an extraordinary conclusion that faith, not reason, was the answer to life's deepest questions. This revelation did not come easily, nor did it resolve all of his doubts, but it gave him a sense of peace that he had never experienced before, and it allowed him to dedicate the rest of his life to a simpler, more purposeful existence, grounded in service to others and faith in something greater than himself. This is the paradox of Tolstoy's life. Despite all of his intellectual brilliance, it was not through reason alone that he found the answers to his existential questions. It was through the acceptance of something beyond the reach of human understanding, faith in the divine, in love, in service to others, that he found peace. And in this, Tolstoy's journey offers a profound lesson for all of us, that meaning is not always something that can be reasoned or intellectualized. Sometimes, it must be felt, lived, and embraced through faith. Tolstoy's crisis of meaning, a profound existential struggle that gripped him in his 50s, is one of the most poignant moments in the history of philosophy and literature. At a time when many people might have been satisfied with the fruits of their success, Tolstoy found himself trapped in a labyrinth of doubt and despair. His fame, wealth, and success as a writer seemed utterly meaningless when confronted with the questions of life's purpose, suffering, and death. The very questions that had plagued him since his youth, what is the purpose of life? What happens after death? Reached a boiling point in his later years. Despite everything he had achieved, Tolstoy could not escape the gnawing sensation that life was devoid of inherent meaning. In fact, his crisis was so profound that he came to contemplate suicide, driven by the crushing weight of nihilism. This moment of crisis was not merely a fleeting episode for Tolstoy, but rather a complete breakdown of his worldview. As he faced the reality of his mortality, Tolstoy's intellectual achievements, his wealth, and his fame appeared inconsequential in the face of his existential despair. In his famous essay A Confession, he confesses the depth of his nihilism, explaining how he had to trick himself into continuing to live, despite feeling that nothing really mattered. The weight of his questions that no intellectual answer could seem to resolve drove him to the brink of ending his life. He had all the material comforts one could desire, yet these comforts failed to provide him with the peace or satisfaction he so desperately sought. Life, as he saw it, was a brief, cruel passage from birth to death, a cycle of suffering with no lasting purpose. In contemplating his own existence, Tolstoy found himself caught in a vicious circle of doubt. The more he searched for meaning, the more he felt lost. In the face of suffering, death, and the seeming randomness of life, the traditional answers provided by religion, philosophy, and society felt inadequate. He questioned the very foundation of everything: family, society, the meaning of work and achievement. The success of his novels, such as War and Peace and Anna Karenina, did nothing to assuage the inner turmoil. These works, which had made him a household name, now seemed irrelevant in light of the deeper questions of existence. The human condition, with its inherent suffering, appeared to offer no escape. Tolstoy's personal crisis of meaning is reflected in the character of Levin, the central figure in Anna Karenina. Levin, who is often regarded as a thinly veiled representation of Tolstoy himself, shares the same doubts and struggles about the purpose of life, suffering, and death. In the novel, Levin wrestles with the idea that life is a series of inevitable sufferings, followed by death, with no real meaning in between. His internal dialogue echoes Tolstoy's own thoughts during this period: if not now, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then in 30 years. Does it really matter? Levin's repeated musings about life's meaninglessness mirror Tolstoy's own sense of futility. Levin, like Tolstoy, is trapped in a world where intellectual solutions seem utterly incapable of providing peace. His existential crisis becomes the emotional heart of the novel, and his eventual search for redemption becomes a central theme in Tolstoy's own life. Tolstoy's existential despair was not an isolated experience limited to his own intellectual circle. Throughout history, many prominent figures have struggled with similar questions about the meaning of life, suffering, and death. The renowned physicist Albert Einstein, for example, was known for grappling with the limitations of science to answer the existential questions that Tolstoy faced. Einstein's scientific achievements were monumental, but he, too, faced a sense of cosmic insignificance when contemplating the vastness of the universe and the brevity of human life. In his letters, Einstein expressed a deep sense of personal struggle with the absence of any clear, final answers to life's ultimate questions. Like Tolstoy, Einstein sought solace in human relationships and in the beauty of the natural world, but found it difficult to reconcile his scientific mind with the existential questions that arose from his awareness of his own mortality. Similarly, in modern times, figures such as Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, have openly admitted to struggling with the existential questions of life. Musk, despite being one of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world, has publicly discussed his concerns about the purpose of life and the inevitable nature of death. He has reflected on how he finds meaning in his work by striving to make life multiplanetary, advancing humanity's technological capabilities, and ensuring the survival of the human race. But even he has admitted to moments of existential doubt. Musk's drive to push the boundaries of space exploration, while deeply meaningful on one level, is also a reflection of a deep-seated desire to address the ultimate question: why are we here? And what is the point of all this? What is striking about Tolstoy's crisis of meaning is that, despite the suffering and despair it caused him, it ultimately led to a profound shift in his worldview. Rather than continuing to be consumed by nihilism, Tolstoy began searching for a solution outside of intellectualism and materialism. His crisis was not just an intellectual exercise, it was a deeply personal, spiritual struggle. The crisis of meaning became a turning point in his life, one that would redefine his entire understanding of the human experience. Tolstoy eventually found solace not in the answers provided by reason or philosophy, but in a radical, personal acceptance of faith, in embracing Christianity once again, not the formalized, institutional Christianity he had rejected earlier, but a more personal, mystical faith. Tolstoy was able to reframe his existential despair. For Tolstoy, this spiritual awakening was not just an intellectual epiphany, but a deeply emotional and personal transformation. He found peace in the acceptance of life as it was, with all its suffering and uncertainty. This transformation was not a smooth or easy process. In fact, Tolstoy's personal religious journey was fraught with doubts and contradictions. Yet, by embracing the idea that the meaning of life was not something to be discovered through intellectual reasoning alone, but something to be lived through faith, Tolstoy found a sense of inner peace that had previously eluded him. This shift in perspective was profoundly important, not only for Tolstoy's personal life, but for his work as well. His later writings, such as The Kingdom of God is Within You, reflected his new spiritual beliefs and sought to communicate the idea that true meaning and fulfillment in life come not from material success or intellectual achievement, but from living in accordance with one's faith and dedicating oneself to others. This shift from intellectualism to faith, from the pursuit of knowledge to the embrace of love and service, marked the final chapter of Tolstoy's personal journey. It was a conclusion that reflected a profound understanding of the human condition. Tolstoy's journey out of the darkness of nihilism and into the light of faith and service offers a powerful message for anyone who struggles with similar existential questions. His life story speaks to the universal human condition, the search for meaning, the confrontation with suffering, and the ultimate need for spiritual fulfillment. His message is clear. While reason may not provide all the answers, love, faith, and service to others can offer a deeper, more enduring sense of purpose. This shift in perspective, from despair to faith, is not a simple or linear process. It requires a willingness to confront one's darkest fears and doubts, but it also offers the possibility of redemption. For Tolstoy, This transformation was not merely about reconciling his intellectual concerns with spiritual beliefs. It was about finding a deeper, more meaningful way of living. Tolstoy's journey out of despair and into faith resonates with many of the great figures of history who have faced similar struggles. Whether it is Einstein grappling with the limitations of science, Elon Musk searching for purpose in technological innovation, or anyone else who has achieved success and yet struggled with existential doubt, the search for meaning is an inherent part of the human condition. In the end, Tolstoy's message is one of hope, a reminder that, even in the face of suffering, there is a way forward. By embracing faith, love, and service to others, we can find a sense of purpose that transcends the fleeting nature of life itself. Tolstoy's crisis of meaning was not an endpoint but a beginning, a starting point for a new way of living that continues to resonate with people across time and space. As Tolstoy plunged deeper into his existential crisis, his search for meaning became an intense and often painful quest that took him through the realms of philosophy, science, and religion. He sought answers to the questions that had tormented him for years. Why are we here? What is the purpose of life? Why must we suffer? And most importantly, what happens after death? Tolstoy's intellectual journey was marked by a relentless pursuit of truth, driven by an overwhelming need to find peace in the face of his despair. Yet, despite the depth of his exploration, the answers he found only seemed to deepen his sense of confusion and futility. In his search for answers, Tolstoy turned first to philosophy. He read the works of the great philosophers of antiquity, including Socrates and Solomon, hoping to find some kind of wisdom that could give him clarity. Socrates, with his method of questioning and pursuit of virtue, held an attraction for Tolstoy, who was also consumed by a desire for moral and intellectual clarity. However, despite the intellectual rigor of Socratic philosophy, Tolstoy found little comfort in it. Socrates' focus on ethical living and the pursuit of knowledge seemed to offer no answers to the deeper, existential questions that were consuming him. Similarly, the wisdom of Solomon, often regarded as the greatest philosopher in the Jewish tradition, did not provide the kind of solace Tolstoy sought. Solomon's reflections on life, death, and the meaning of human existence, while profound, ultimately led Tolstoy to the same conclusion he had reached on his own. Life is fleeting, and death is inevitable. Solomon's famous line from Ecclesiastes, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity," resonated deeply with Tolstoy, but it also deepened his despair. Despite his disillusionment with the Greek and biblical traditions, Tolstoy did not give up on his search for meaning. He turned to Eastern philosophies, particularly Buddhism, in the hope that they might provide a different perspective. Buddhism, with its emphasis on the impermanence of life and the quest for liberation from suffering, initially seemed to offer a kind of peace that Tolstoy had been seeking. The Buddhist concept of nirvana, the state of liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, appealed to Tolstoy's desire to escape the endless suffering of life. Yet, like the other philosophies he had explored, Buddhism left him with a profound sense of emptiness. The Buddhist path to enlightenment, which called for renunciation of attachment and the cessation of desires, seemed, in Tolstoy's view, to be an abandonment of life itself. It was a form of escape, not engagement, and that left him feeling even more disconnected from the world around him. Tolstoy's exploration of philosophy and religion was not confined to ancient or Eastern traditions. He also turned to modern Western ideas, but these too failed to provide any real comfort. The prevailing intellectual climate of his time was dominated by the rise of scientific thinking and the acceptance of Darwinian evolution, which Tolstoy found deeply unsettling. He read works on Darwinism with an open mind, hoping to gain some understanding of humanity's place in the grand scheme of the universe. However, what he encountered was a worldview that seemed even more nihilistic than the philosophies he had previously explored. Darwinism, with its focus on survival and natural selection, seemed to reduce human life to a mere accident in the vast, indifferent cosmos. The idea that life was nothing more than a random series of events, governed by impersonal laws of nature, struck Tolstoy as a cold, mechanical view of existence that left no room for meaning or purpose. For Tolstoy, Darwinism was a kind of intellectual confirmation of the futility of life. It suggested that human beings, far from being part of a grand cosmic design, were merely the products of blind chance, a tiny, insignificant blip in the vastness of time and space. In this view, human suffering, death, and existence itself seemed to be part of an inevitable, indifferent process that offered no real answers or hope. This intellectual dead end left Tolstoy in an even deeper state of despair. The more he searched for meaning, the more he found himself confronted with bleak, nihilistic visions of existence. The philosophers had failed to provide answers, and science seemed to offer only cold, mechanistic explanations for the complexity of life. The result was a profound sense of alienation and confusion. Tolstoy's struggle with nihilism mirrored the struggles of many prominent figures throughout history who have sought answers to life's deepest questions. Figures like Friedrich Nietzsche, who famously declared that God is dead, and Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher who argued that life has no inherent meaning, offer parallel examples of individuals confronting the harsh realities of existence. Nietzsche, in particular, explored the idea of the will to power as a means of overcoming nihilism. But even his philosophy ultimately left many feeling that life's ultimate meaning remained elusive. Similarly, Sartre's existentialism, while offering individuals the freedom to create their own meaning, was often perceived as a lonely and isolating philosophy that left no room for ultimate answers about life's purpose. In his own life, Tolstoy was not immune to the sense of isolation that often accompanies existential despair. Despite his fame and success, he found himself increasingly cut off from the world around him. His growing sense of disillusionment led him to question not only the meaning of his own life, but also the social and moral structures of society. He became deeply critical of the materialism and superficiality that he saw in the lives of the wealthy and powerful, including his own. His search for answers, driven by a profound sense of dissatisfaction, pushed him to the brink of self-doubt and despair. At the height of his crisis, Tolstoy even began to consider the possibility that life was not worth living at all. His famous letter to his wife, Sophia, in which he wrote about his desire to end his life, reflects the depths of his existential anguish. He described how he could no longer find joy in his writing, in his family, or in the pleasures that had once brought him happiness. For Tolstoy, these material comforts now seemed hollow and meaningless in the face of his existential questions. In this letter, Tolstoy articulated the central conflict that had been tearing him apart. On the one hand, he had everything: fame, wealth, family, respect, but on the other, he had nothing. He had achieved worldly success, but it had not brought him peace or fulfillment. It had only left him feeling more empty, more isolated, and more consumed by the fear of death. Tolstoy's quest for answers was not just an intellectual exercise. It was a matter of life and death. The existential questions that consumed him were not abstract concerns but fundamental issues that threatened his sense of self and purpose. In the end, Tolstoy's exploration of philosophy, science, and religion did not provide the answers he so desperately sought. However, this very quest for meaning set the stage for a profound personal transformation. Tolstoy would ultimately turn away from intellectualism and materialism, seeking a path to peace not through reason or science, but through faith. His later writings, particularly The Kingdom of God is Within You, reflect this shift in perspective, as Tolstoy embraced the idea that true meaning in life comes not from the intellectual pursuit of knowledge, but from living a life of love, compassion, and service to others. Tolstoy's journey of existential inquiry and personal transformation serves as a reminder that the search for meaning is not always a straightforward path. It is often fraught with confusion, doubt, and despair. However, Tolstoy's eventual turn towards faith offers hope for those who struggle with similar questions. His life illustrates that, even in the face of profound suffering and uncertainty, there is a path to redemption, a path that leads not to intellectual certainty but to a deeper, more spiritual understanding of the human condition. Like many great figures before him, Tolstoy's quest for answers ultimately led him to a place of spiritual awakening, where he found peace not in the answers themselves, but in the way he chose to live his life. Tolstoy's encounter with the parable of the man in the well represented a pivotal moment in his intellectual and spiritual journey, offering him a profound metaphor for the struggle to find meaning in life. The parable, simple yet deeply symbolic, captures the essence of human existence caught between the inevitable reality of death and the existential dread that accompanies it. At its core, this story of a man who falls into a well while fleeing from a wild beast and finds himself facing a dragon at the bottom is a vivid image of the human condition, particularly Tolstoy's own internal conflict as he grappled with the futility of life and the fear of death. The man's precarious situation suspended by a branch, with only the danger of the dragon below and the beast above, mirrors Tolstoy's existential crisis, where he felt trapped between the hopelessness of life and the finality of death. At the heart of the parable is the man's attempt to escape his imminent death by clinging to the branch that is barely holding him above the abyss. His fear of falling into the dragon's jaws is palpable, but what is most striking is the moment of distraction: the drops of honey on the leaves of the branch. In his desperation, the man reaches out to taste the honey, savoring the fleeting sweetness even though his life is at risk. This brief interlude of pleasure, however trivial or temporary, provides a stark contrast to the otherwise overwhelming reality of danger and impending doom. The man's action grasping at the honey in the face of certain death speaks to the fundamental human desire for meaning, even when faced with the most absurd and futile circumstances. For Tolstoy, this parable was more than just a literary image. It was a profound metaphor for his own life. He saw himself as the man in the well, caught between two powerful forces: the wild beast of existential dread, symbolizing the terrifying questions about the meaning of life, and the dragon of death, representing the ultimate, inescapable conclusion to his suffering. Like the man, Tolstoy was grappling with the tension between life and death, meaning and meaninglessness. He had achieved great worldly success, wealth, fame, recognition, but none of it offered him a satisfying answer to the deeper questions that haunted him. In fact, it only deepened his despair, as he found that material success could not shield him from the existential void he felt inside. The honey, in the parable, can be seen as the small, fleeting moments of comfort or meaning that one might grasp in the midst of suffering. These moments, while temporary, offer a brief respite from the crushing weight of life's ultimate questions. For Tolstoy, these moments of sweetness were the things that kept him going: his family, his writing, his moments of connection with others. These things gave him temporary relief, much like the man in the well who, despite his imminent peril, finds comfort in the honey. Yet, Tolstoy was acutely aware that these moments were ephemeral. They could not solve the deeper, more fundamental issues he faced, just as the honey could not save the man from the dragon. Nonetheless, they served as crucial lifelines, providing him with enough sustenance to keep searching for a more enduring answer. Tolstoy's reflection on the parable reveals a crucial aspect of the human condition: the tension between despair and hope, between the harsh realities of life and the fleeting moments of joy or meaning that offer relief. It is this tension that drives people to continue searching for meaning, even when it seems that life itself offers no ultimate answers. The man in the well, despite being surrounded by danger, continues to reach out for the honey, just as Tolstoy, despite the overwhelming existential questions that consumed him, continued his search for understanding. These moments of honey are not a denial of the danger, but rather a brief acknowledgement of life's complexity, of its mixture of suffering and joy, of meaning and meaninglessness. This struggle for meaning, despite the futility of life, is not unique to Tolstoy. It resonates with the experiences of many prominent figures throughout history who have grappled with similar existential dilemmas. Take, for example, the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, whose existentialism emphasized the inherent meaninglessness of life. Sartre argued that life has no predefined purpose, and it is up to each individual to create their own meaning through their actions. While Sartre's philosophy is rooted in the rejection of external sources of meaning, it also acknowledges the struggle that people face in the face of life's apparent absurdity. Sartre's famous assertion that existence precedes essence points to the fundamental human need to make meaning out of a world that offers none. In a way, the act of creating one's own meaning can be seen as grasping at the honey in the well, seeking out moments of sweetness in a world that offers little else. Similarly, figures like Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, explored the human quest for meaning in the face of suffering. Frankl's work, particularly his book Man's Search for Meaning, examines the idea that even in the most dire circumstances, people can find meaning through their attitudes and actions. Frankl's philosophy is rooted in the belief that life has meaning, even if that meaning is not always apparent. He famously wrote that those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. This idea aligns with Tolstoy's own realization that despite the meaninglessness he felt, there were still moments of sweetness in life that could provide him with the strength to continue. Like the man in the well, Tolstoy found that the act of reaching for something, however small or fleeting, was a way to endure the crushing weight of existential despair. The tension between despair and hope, between meaning and meaninglessness, is not just an intellectual concern for philosophers or literary figures, it is a lived experience for millions of people every day. In today's world, where existential crises are often exacerbated by societal pressures, political instability, and the rapid pace of technological change, the quest for meaning remains as relevant as ever. Take, for instance, the global struggles of political figures like Vladimir Putin or the late Steve Jobs. Both men, though powerful in different ways, face their own existential questions, albeit in different contexts. Putin's leadership has been marked by his desire for power and control. Yet beneath that drive lies a complex relationship with mortality and legacy. Similarly, Steve Jobs, despite his extraordinary achievements in technology, constantly sought deeper meaning in life, often exploring spiritual practices and personal growth. Both of these figures, despite their wealth and influence, grappled with questions of what truly matters in life. What Tolstoy's parable and the lives of these powerful figures illustrate is that the quest for meaning is not just about the grand questions of existence, but also about how individuals confront the mundane, everyday challenges of life. It is about finding meaning in the small, fleeting moments, the drops of honey that help us get through the tough times. Whether it is a moment of beauty, a personal connection, or a brief sense of peace, these sweet moments can provide the relief we need to continue the search for something deeper, something more lasting. Tolstoy's reflection on the parable of the man in the well ultimately suggests that life, while fraught with difficulty and uncertainty, also offers moments of sweetness that can sustain us. These moments, though brief and ephemeral, are part of the human experience. They are not distractions from the harsh realities of life, but essential components of the journey toward understanding and meaning. For Tolstoy, and for all of us, these moments serve as reminders that even in the face of existential despair, there is still hope, a hope that is found not in answers, but in the way we choose to live, in the moments we savor, and in the connections we make along the way. In his search for answers to life's great questions, Tolstoy observed the way people responded to the absurdity of existence. As he struggled with the realization that life had no inherent meaning, he noted that there were four primary ways in which individuals coped with the harsh, indifferent reality of life. These coping mechanisms, which Tolstoy identified in himself and others, reflect different responses to the existential crisis that arises when one confronts the idea that life may be ultimately meaningless. The first response, and perhaps the most common, was the ignorance of the absurd. Many people, Tolstoy observed, simply chose to ignore the existential questions that plagued him. They went about their lives with little to no contemplation of life's deeper meaning or purpose. They focused on the practicalities of living, work, family, pleasure without dwelling on the inevitable questions about death, suffering, and the ultimate significance of existence. This ignorance, however, was not the same as ignorance in the traditional sense of simply not knowing. It was an active decision to avoid contemplating the absurdity of life, to live in a kind of self-imposed oblivion. This coping mechanism mirrors the philosophy of absurdism, most famously articulated by the French existentialist Albert Camus. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus argues that life is inherently absurd because it has no meaning or purpose. The human quest for meaning in a universe that offers none is, according to Camus, a futile pursuit. However, rather than succumb to despair, Camus suggests that we should continue living despite the absurdity, embracing life without seeking meaning. This approach, which Camus calls revolt, involves accepting the absurdity of existence while still choosing to live fully and authentically. For Camus, the realization that life is absurd is not an invitation to give up, but an opportunity to embrace the struggle and continue moving forward. Tolstoy, however, did not find this path to be a sustainable or ultimately satisfying one. Though many people around him lived their lives without ever confronting the deep existential questions, Tolstoy believed that such avoidance was only temporary. Sooner or later, life's harsh realities, sickness, aging, and, most importantly, the death of loved ones would force individuals to confront the uncomfortable truths they had been avoiding. In other words, Tolstoy believed that while ignorance may offer short-term relief, it could not shield one from the inevitable existential crisis that would arise with time. This view is encapsulated in his reflection on his own life. He, too, had once lived in ignorance of life's deeper meaning, but when death came too close, he could no longer avoid the pressing questions. The second response to life's absurdity that Tolstoy identified was Epicureanism, the pursuit of pleasure as a means of coping with the harsh realities of existence. Epicureanism, a philosophy that originated with the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, argues that pleasure is the ultimate good and that individuals should seek to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. For many people, Tolstoy noted, this meant turning to material pleasures, wealth, relationships, entertainment as distractions from the fear of death and the realization that life had no inherent meaning. In the face of existential dread, people sought to numb themselves with pleasure, hoping that indulgence would provide relief from the unbearable weight of life's questions. However, Tolstoy found this path to be deeply unsatisfying. While pleasure could provide temporary relief from the pain and anxiety that arose from contemplating life's meaninglessness, it could not offer a lasting solution to the deeper existential questions. No amount of wealth, fame, or pleasure could answer the fundamental question, what is the point of it all? As Tolstoy reflected on his own life, he realized that his pursuit of pleasure had ultimately left him feeling empty. Despite his material success, he felt no closer to understanding the purpose of existence. The sweetness of indulgence could only numb the pain for so long, but it did not provide any real answers. This is a sentiment that echoes in the words of many wealthy and powerful individuals, such as the late Steve Jobs. Jobs, despite his immense success in revolutionizing the tech industry, was known to have struggled with existential questions about the meaning of life. He famously said, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work." Even Jobs, despite his incredible achievements, sought meaning beyond material success, suggesting that the search for purpose cannot be satisfied through indulgence alone. The third response to life's absurdity, and one that Tolstoy himself wrestled with, was suicide. Overwhelmed by the meaninglessness of existence and unable to find any lasting solace, some individuals chose to end their lives as a way of escaping the unbearable burden of existential despair. Tolstoy, in the darkest moments of his own life, considered this option. He grappled with the thought of ending it all, feeling that there was no point in continuing a life that seemed empty and without meaning. In a confession, Tolstoy reflects on his own suicidal thoughts, admitting that he had reached a point where the only way to escape the torment of his existential questions seemed to be through death. Yet, despite his despair, Tolstoy ultimately rejected suicide as a solution. He came to believe that ending his life would not resolve the existential crisis that plagued him. Rather, It would be an abdication of his responsibility to continue searching for meaning. In his later years, Tolstoy found a new sense of purpose in his quest for spiritual understanding, embracing the possibility that meaning could be found through faith. He also realized that the pain he was experiencing could be channeled into a search for a deeper understanding of life. The idea of suicide, in Tolstoy's view, was a form of cowardice, a refusal to confront the existential questions head-on. Instead, he believed that individuals should persist in their search for meaning, even in the face of overwhelming despair. This message resonates with the lives of many public figures who, despite facing personal and professional crises, chose to continue living. For example, in the case of prominent figures like Elon Musk, despite the immense pressures and challenges he faces in his business ventures, Musk has continually pushed forward, motivated by his vision of a future on Mars and sustainable energy. Musk's drive to continue, even when the task seems insurmountable, illustrates the human capacity for resilience in the face of existential difficulty. The fourth and final response Tolstoy identified was what he called existential limbo. This was the condition of those who, after recognizing the meaninglessness of life, became paralyzed by it, unable to take action or find any sense of purpose. They existed in a state of passive resignation. For these individuals, the acknowledgement of life's futility led to an emotional and spiritual paralysis. They could no longer engage with the world or find joy in the simple act of living. The realization that life had no inherent meaning led them to a place of stagnation, where they were unable to move forward or find any semblance of direction. Tolstoy saw this form of living as the weakest and most debilitating. In his view, existential limbo was the greatest tragedy because it offered no resolution or hope. It was a state of being where one had given up on life altogether, resigned to the belief that nothing mattered. In Tolstoy's own life, he eventually broke free from this paralysis by turning to religion, finding a new sense of meaning through faith. He came to see that, while life may not have inherent meaning, the search for meaning itself could provide a sense of purpose. His embrace of faith, particularly the teachings of Christ, gave him the strength to overcome the existential despair that had once consumed him. Tolstoy's exploration of these four ways of coping with life's absurdity reveals the complexity of the human condition. In his own life, he moved through each of these stages from ignorance to pleasure-seeking, to suicidal thoughts, and finally to a search for meaning through faith. His journey serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of facing life's difficult questions head-on, rather than avoiding them, and the importance of continuing the search for meaning, even when the answers are elusive. As Tolstoy's own transformation shows, the quest for meaning is not a linear path, but one that requires persistence, self-examination, and an openness to the possibility of finding purpose beyond the apparent absurdity of existence. Tolstoy's quest for meaning had long been a solitary and intellectual journey. Having experienced profound disillusionment with the philosophical systems and scientific explanations of his time, Tolstoy found himself grappling with the emptiness of a world that offered no clear answers to the fundamental questions of life. For years, he had sought solace in reason, in books, in the pursuit of knowledge, but each answer only led to more questions, each solution seemingly more hollow than the last. At his lowest, this intellectual pursuit led him to contemplate the idea that life itself might be without meaning, an absurd existence to be endured until death provided its final release. But everything changed when Tolstoy began observing the lives of peasants in the Russian countryside. In these humble and often impoverished people, he saw something that eluded him in his own privileged, intellectual circles, a sense of peace and purpose. Despite their lack of material wealth, their hardships, and their struggles, these peasants seemed to possess an inner strength, an unwavering sense of meaning that Tolstoy could not fathom. The source of this strength, he realized, was their deep and unshakable faith in God. This was a crucial turning point in Tolstoy's life, a revelation that would shape the rest of his philosophical and spiritual journey. He began to observe that, for these peasants, faith was not simply a religious or intellectual abstraction. It was the very foundation of their existence. They endured life's hardships with remarkable resilience, grounded not in material success or intellectual pursuits, but in the belief that there was something greater than themselves. Their faith gave them a sense of purpose, a reason to endure suffering, a way to transcend the inevitability of death. This realization was both humbling and profound for Tolstoy, who had spent much of his life searching for answers in books, philosophy, and the pursuit of wealth. In his own life, Tolstoy had achieved everything that many would consider the hallmarks of success: fame, wealth, and social standing. Yet, despite all of this, he felt an immense emptiness inside. In the face of death, he could not find peace, and in the face of suffering, he could not find meaning. His intellectual achievements, his artistic contributions, and his material wealth could not provide him with a lasting sense of purpose. He had been unable to answer the fundamental questions of life. What is the meaning of suffering? Why do we live? What happens after death? The peasants, however, appeared to have found an answer, one that transcended reason and intellect. Tolstoy's growing awareness of this simple, yet profound faith in the lives of the poor led him to begin his own journey of spiritual exploration. As he observed their unshakable belief in a higher power, he realized that he had been missing something crucial in his own life: the acknowledgement of a reality beyond the material world. While his intellectual pursuits had focused on reason, logic, and the tangible world around him, the peasants' faith had led them to a deeper connection with the infinite, with the eternal truths that transcend the transient concerns of daily life. This moment of revelation did not come quickly or easily for Tolstoy. He had spent years rejecting traditional religious teachings, viewing them as hollow and inadequate. His early experiences with religion had been steeped in intellectual skepticism, and his education had taught him to view faith as something antiquated or irrational. For much of his life, Tolstoy had been consumed by a quest for answers through reason, searching for a logical, rational explanation to the mysteries of existence. But now, he began to see that reason alone could not provide the peace and meaning he sought. This revelation was a turning point in Tolstoy's spiritual journey. He came to understand that in order to transcend the limitations of human knowledge, he would have to embrace faith in something greater than himself. This faith, however, would not be an abstract concept or a mere intellectual exercise. It would be something lived, something experienced. It would be a faith that connected him to the infinite, to a reality beyond the confines of his own limited understanding. Tolstoy's revelation about the importance of faith is echoed in the lives of many influential figures throughout history, whose own journeys of self-discovery and spiritual awakening were deeply connected to their ability to embrace a higher purpose. For example, the late Nelson Mandela, who endured 27 years of imprisonment in South Africa, found his resilience and sense of purpose in his belief in justice and equality. Mandela, like Tolstoy, was deeply affected by his time in prison, and it was through his unwavering belief in a cause greater than himself that he was able to endure the suffering and hardship he faced. Mandela's ability to remain hopeful and focused on his vision for a free and democratic South Africa was rooted in his faith in humanity and in the possibility of a better future. Similarly, figures like Mahatma Gandhi also found strength in faith, both in the religious sense and in their commitment to a higher moral truth. Gandhi's faith in nonviolence and his belief in the power of truth as a guiding principle helped him navigate the personal and political struggles of his life. Just as Tolstoy observed in the lives of the peasants, Gandhi's faith gave him a sense of purpose that transcended the physical and political realities of the world around him. It provided him with a framework for understanding the complexities of life and suffering, allowing him to act with courage and conviction even in the face of overwhelming adversity. In both of these examples, faith played a central role in helping individuals find purpose in life. For Tolstoy, as for Mandela and Gandhi, faith was not merely about religious observance or abstract belief. It was about finding meaning in the midst of life's struggles, in the face of suffering, and even in the inevitability of death. It was the recognition that there is something beyond the finite world, a higher purpose, a deeper connection to the universe that gives life meaning. As Tolstoy embraced this newfound faith, he began to experience a profound sense of peace and purpose that had eluded him for so long. His intellectual struggles and existential doubts began to fade as he turned his attention to the simplicity and profundity of faith. He realized that, by embracing a connection to the infinite, he could find meaning in life not in the accumulation of wealth or the pursuit of fame, but in the recognition that life itself, with all of its suffering and impermanence, could be part of a larger, divine plan. This shift in Tolstoy's worldview was not just a personal transformation. It was also reflected in his work. In his later writings, particularly The Kingdom of God is Within You, Tolstoy began to advocate for a radical Christian anarchism, one that rejected the established institutions of the church and the state, and instead emphasized the power of individual faith and moral action. His philosophical and spiritual writings became a call to action, urging others to embrace a life of simplicity, humility, and faith in God as the path to true meaning and peace. He believed that by living according to the principles of love and compassion, individuals could create a better world, one rooted in spiritual truth rather than materialism and worldly power. Tolstoy's encounter with the faith of the peasants was, in many ways, a return to the simplicity and humility that had characterized the early teachings of Christ. It was an acknowledgement that true peace and purpose in life could not be found through intellectual achievement or material success, but through a deeper, more personal connection to the divine. This revelation, which Tolstoy had resisted for much of his life, ultimately brought him a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. And it was this peace, rooted in faith, that allowed Tolstoy to live the rest of his life with a sense of meaning and purpose that transcended the fleeting concerns of his earlier years. In conclusion, Tolstoy's transformation from an intellectual skeptic to a deeply spiritual individual is a testament to the power of faith to provide meaning and purpose in life. His revelation about the importance of faith in something greater than oneself is a reminder that, in the face of life's absurdity and suffering, it is often through our connection to a higher power or purpose that we find true peace. The lives of figures like Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi further illustrate this truth, showing that faith, whether in a cause or in a higher moral principle, can give individuals the strength and resilience to face even the greatest challenges. Ultimately, Tolstoy's journey teaches us that while intellectual pursuits and material success may bring fleeting satisfaction, it is through faith in something greater than ourselves that we can find lasting meaning and purpose in life. As Tolstoy entered the later years of his life, his internal struggle, which had once been rooted in a search for intellectual answers to life's existential questions, gave way to a profound spiritual transformation. His previous rejection of faith, especially Christianity, now seemed to him like a misguided path, one that had failed to bring him lasting peace. Yet, the embrace of faith was not a simple or easy decision for Tolstoy. It was, in many ways, a monumental shift, one that required him to reconsider not only his personal beliefs, but also the way in which he viewed the world, the purpose of life, and the nature of human suffering. In his youth and early adulthood, Tolstoy had been consumed by questions of existence. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of suffering? Why do we live if death is inevitable? For years, he had sought answers in intellectual pursuits, reading philosophical texts, studying scientific theories, and contemplating the vastness of the universe. Yet, despite all of his efforts, he found no solace. The more he sought, the more elusive the answers seemed, until he was left with an overwhelming sense of emptiness and despair. At the height of his despair, Tolstoy experienced what could be described as a spiritual awakening, a moment in which he was struck by the realization that the intellectual quest for meaning could not provide the answers he so desperately sought. He had spent years wrestling with philosophy, but it was not through reason or logic that he found peace. Rather, it was through a profound shift in perspective, one that led him to embrace faith not as an intellectual exercise, but as a spiritual truth. This was not a decision based on empirical evidence or rational argumentation, but rather on a deep, personal conviction. It was a faith rooted in the understanding that the ultimate meaning of life could not be found in the material world. nor in the fleeting achievements of human intellect or wealth. Tolstoy's embrace of faith was, in many ways, a rejection of the idea that life could be understood purely through reason and logic. Instead, he turned to something beyond the confines of human understanding, a belief in something greater than himself, something transcendent and divine. This shift in his worldview marked the beginning of a new chapter in Tolstoy's life, one in which he would find purpose and peace not in intellectual pursuits, but in spiritual humility and service to others. One of the most striking aspects of Tolstoy's transformation was his newfound focus on simplicity and humility. In the past, he had sought meaning in the accumulation of material wealth, fame, and intellectual achievement. He had been a man of privilege, living a life of comfort and luxury. Yet this life had never brought him the peace he sought. Now, in his embrace of faith, Tolstoy realized that true peace could not be found in these external markers of success. Instead, he turned to a simpler, more humble way of life, one that was focused on the well-being of others and service to humanity. Tolstoy's decision to embrace a life of simplicity and humility was not merely a personal choice. It was also a moral and ethical commitment. He believed that a meaningful life could only be achieved by living in accordance with the principles of love, compassion, and service. In his later years, Tolstoy began to devote himself to the well-being of the poor and disenfranchised, particularly the peasantry of Russia. He rejected the wealth and status he had once valued, choosing instead to live more modestly and to dedicate his time to helping those in need. His works, such as The Kingdom of God is Within You and A Confession, reflect his belief that true spiritual fulfillment comes not from intellectual or material achievements, but from living a life of humility, service, and faith in something higher. Tolstoy's newfound commitment to a life of service and humility is not unique to him, but can also be seen in the lives of other influential figures who have made similar choices. Take, for example, the late Steve Jobs. The co-founder of Apple Incorporated. Jobs is often remembered for his relentless pursuit of excellence in the world of technology and his role in revolutionizing the industry. However, in the latter part of his life, after being diagnosed with cancer, Jobs shifted his focus from professional success to personal meaning. In his famous commencement address at Stanford University, he reflected on his life and his perspective on success, stating that the work you do will fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. This shift in Jobs' thinking mirrored Tolstoy's own realization that true meaning cannot be found in external achievements alone, but in the alignment of one's work with a higher purpose. Likewise, Mahatma Gandhi, a figure of extraordinary global influence, chose to embrace a life of humility and service after years of intellectual exploration. Gandhi's journey towards spiritual awakening was deeply connected to his embrace of faith. He rejected material wealth and dedicated his life to the service of others, championing nonviolence and advocating for the rights of the marginalized. His decision to live a simple, humble life was grounded in his belief that the purpose of life was not to accumulate wealth or achieve fame, but to serve others and live in accordance with one's deepest moral convictions. Gandhi's life and philosophy bear striking similarities to Tolstoy's later years, and both men exemplify the idea that true fulfillment is found in faith, service, and humility rather than intellectual or material pursuits. Tolstoy's commitment to a simpler way of life, however, was not without its challenges. For a man who had once lived in comfort, with access to wealth and luxury, the decision to embrace a more austere lifestyle was not an easy one. But in his later writings, Tolstoy made it clear that the rewards of this choice were far greater than anything he had gained through his previous pursuits. By focusing on the well-being of others, by living with humility and simplicity, and by devoting himself to a higher purpose, Tolstoy found a peace and contentment that had eluded him for much of his life. One of the most profound aspects of Tolstoy's spiritual transformation was his realization that true meaning in life was not to be found in the pursuit of personal gain or intellectual glory, but in the recognition that life itself, with all of its suffering and impermanence, could be part of a divine plan. He believed that it was only through faith, through a connection to something greater than oneself, that one could find true peace and purpose. This realization was liberating for Tolstoy, for it allowed him to transcend the fear of death and the uncertainty of existence. In the face of suffering, he no longer sought intellectual answers, but turned to faith and service as the means to live a meaningful life. Tolstoy's embrace of faith, his commitment to humility, and his devotion to service are lessons that continue to resonate today. In a world where the pursuit of wealth, fame, and intellectual achievement is often seen as the ultimate goal, Tolstoy's life offers a counterpoint. His journey suggests that true fulfillment is not to be found in external accomplishments, but in the quiet, inner peace that comes from living a life of service to others and faith in something greater than oneself. The struggles and challenges that Tolstoy faced are not unique to him, they are universal. And his journey of spiritual awakening can serve as an inspiration to those who are searching for meaning in their own lives. In conclusion, Tolstoy's embrace of faith and his commitment to a life of humility and service marked a dramatic shift in his understanding of the world and his place within it. He came to recognize that true meaning in life is not found in material wealth or intellectual pursuits, but in faith, love, and service to others. His journey offers profound insights into the nature of life, suffering, and the search for purpose. It reminds us that, in a world that often values external success, the true measure of a meaningful life lies in the way we connect with others, the way we live in alignment with our deepest convictions, and the way we seek to serve a higher purpose. Tolstoy's life and philosophy provide us with a powerful reminder that, even in the face of suffering and death, we can find peace and meaning through faith, humility, and service. Tolstoy's story is a powerful reminder that the search for meaning is a deeply personal and sometimes painful journey. Despite achieving everything that the world tells us we should aspire to, success, wealth, and recognition, he found that these things could not answer the questions that truly mattered. His life teaches us that the meaning of life cannot be found in the fleeting pleasures of fame or intellectual achievement alone. It is found in something greater than ourselves, in faith, humility, and a life dedicated to service. Like Tolstoy, we may find ourselves at crossroads, consumed by doubts and existential questions. But as his journey shows us, it is not in despair or in resignation that we find answers, but in the relentless pursuit of truth. Whether through reason, reflection, or, like Tolstoy, through faith, the answer may not come easily, but the search itself is a path that can lead to peace and purpose. So, the next time you're confronted with the overwhelming question of why am I here, remember Tolstoy's journey. Keep searching, keep questioning, and keep believing that the answers will come, maybe not in the way you expect, but in a way that will give your life profound meaning. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Tolstoy's transformation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation going.